some stuff today. My name is Rachel MacArthur. I'm a policy analyst here at CJC, and I will be facilitating these meetings. And we're going to go through an agenda really quickly, just so you all know what we're covering today. But before that, just a few housekeeping items. And then we are going to quickly go through introductions, just so everybody is aware of who's here. And then we'll get going. So just a reminder, this is a public meeting. So this is being recorded. And because it's a public meeting, we have turned the chat off. And the reason being is because we would then have to read everything that's in the chat into record. And so we just turn it off just for sake of ease. And so with that, if you have something to say, unmute yourself and talk, raise your hand, whatever you're comfortable with. This is meant to be a discussion. We are looking for feedback, so please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and start talking. So really quickly, I'm just going to go down a list and just call out names. If you could just introduce yourself, who you're affiliated with, and whatever else you feel like you'd like to say, go ahead. Also, if I mispronounce your name, please correct me so that I can get it right the next time. So I'll just go down this list just to make it easier. Ryan Downing.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear you.
I'm Ryan Downing. I'm lieutenant with the Baker County Sheriff's Office. Perfect.
Commander Eby.
Hi, I'm Captain Levy. I'm the jail commander here in Clackamas County.
Josh Aldrich. Did I say that last name right?
It's a Ch.
Okay.
Josh Aldrich.
I guessed wrong.
No worries. Captain Josh Aldrich. I'm the jail commander in Jackson County down in Medford.
Welcome. Melanie Manier. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, perfect.
I'm Melanie Manier. I am Clackamas County Sheriff's Office Jail Healthcare Administrative Services Manager.
All right, welcome. Dan Hoover.
Good morning, I'm Dan Hoover. I'm an addiction medicine physician with OHSU and the director of the Addiction Medicine ECHO program at OHSU.
All right, welcome, Dan. Carrie Hecox. Did I say that right? Is Carrie here? Okay. Moxie Loeffler. Orion McCotter.
Hey guys, Orion McCotter. I'm with OHA, Oregon Health Authority, communicable disease manager for carceral settings.
All right, welcome. Grant Hartley.
Yeah, hi, Grant Hartley. I literally just joined. Sorry for being a bit late. I'm the director of Metropolitan Public Defenders in Multnomah County.
Perfect. Welcome, Grant. Annalise Stolf. And Shelia Clark. And then Rep Marsh. Didn't see Rep Marsh. Okay. Welcome. And I promise next time I won't make you all do that unless there's possibly new people, maybe. So I know that's always kind of the awkward, painful part, especially of a virtual meeting. So, okay, let's move on. This is the agenda for today. You all should have gotten, I believe on Tuesday, you should have gotten a copy of the rules draft that we sent out. And so we did highlight some areas. We are going to go through some of those areas today. I don't expect to go through all of them, which is why we have a meeting scheduled next week and then a meeting scheduled the following week. So really quickly, we're going to go over the legislation, the purpose of why you all are here. We will review some things within that draft today, and then there will be time for public comment at the end. This is a very loose schedule. We'll go just kind of as the discussion goes. Also, it is an hour long, and so we didn't schedule a break in here, but if you'll need one, please let me know, and happy to take one, okay? So this is a long explanation as to what we are here for, but we have to, when a bill tells us to, CJC is required to write Oregon administrative rules for grant programs. And so a couple of the methodologies, they're going to be included in here. Program criteria, we will be going over that. Any sort of funding priorities with some of the eligible applicants, and then anything that any feedback where there's a feeling that the application must have this in it. Some of that in particular could be related to data that we collect, and so things like that. So we will make sure to cover that. And then also, if the bill calls for it, there are sometimes where we need, particularly very similar to this one, where we might need feedback on a very specific definition that has to be included in the rules. And so that's why we're here today. So this is meant to just be a discussion. We are asking for feedback. We tried to provide you all with language to react to provide any sort of input, feedback, and discussion, and what could be missing or what needs to be taken out or what's not necessary or not relevant. So that is kind of the purpose of the next couple of meetings, is to just go through this and get an idea of how this grant from like a structural and procedural point of view should operate. Okay, what are the guidelines and kind of the guardrails for this particular grant program? So really quickly, for those of you who may need to see this, I think in my notes, I refer to this as JMOOD just because it is a very long name. So it's the Jail-Based Medications for Opioid Use Disorder Grant Program. And so we will, at CJC, we tend to just kind of shorten that into JMOOD. So you'll see that throughout. There is $10 million in other funds over 2 years available for this grant. And eligible recipients include cities and counties that operate a local correctional facility and federally recognized tribes in Oregon that operate a tribal correctional facility. So in the draft rules, there are 2 definitions that the bill provided where they defined those. So we're not going to cover those today, but they are in there. And then also the applicants can submit an individual application, or they can submit a joint application with other entities. And so this is kind of a very high, quick overview of the bill. And in the rules, we do recognize eligible recipients, and then as well as their ability to how they can apply within a group. There is a section in here that we will be going over probably maybe today if we have time, where we talk about collaboration that we will touch on as well and get your feedback on. So any questions on this very high overview of this grant program? Does everybody know why we're here today? Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is an estimated timeline, just so you all are aware of what we're moving towards. So May, June, this is where we're at. We're setting up a rules advisory committee. Part of the reason why the May, June to August there is that gap is when we do submit rules, we have a 7-week period where we have to leave it open for notice for public comment. And so we did build in that time between kind of the opening of the application to all the eligible applicants. There will be a grant advisory committee that will evaluate the applications after they come in. And then the goal right now with this timeline is to get the commission approval in October, and then get everything, funds and everything out the door shortly thereafter. So this could change, but this is kind of the broad overview timeline for where we're at and why we're doing this now. Okay. Okay, so if you have I'm not going to share the draft rules that we provided to you all. Does anybody not have a copy of the PDF that was sent out? Does anybody need that? We can get you a copy if you did not receive one. Is everybody okay? And so I kind of want to set up this one section before we get to it. One of the things that we do have to do that we are going to need feedback on is we have to define rural and what that actually means in terms of Oregon. And so in the draft rules, we provided 3 different examples. And we had this idea of presenting a map based on these different definitions to you all. We do have a map, but what we discovered is that Oregon is pretty homogeneous. It's a pretty homogeneous state, and these maps pretty much, regardless of the different types of definitions and different types of sources that we used, pretty much are the same. And so I do have a map that is available that will show you the breakdown of urban versus rural based on these definitions. But as we go through these, what we are asking for feedback on is if it makes sense, just in general, if the definition makes sense. And then also if it's something that can hold up. There's a bit of longevity to this definition and it makes sense. One thing that we did try to take into account with these is the fact that we are looking at correctional facilities. And so we're looking at a physical space, a physical thing. And we tried to connect these specific definitions to that idea. And so if there is feedback in that we missed, or if there's feedback in that we need more detail, I may ask for some specificity in terms of wording. But that's kind of the approach that we tried to take. We tried to give some options. It's kind of a difficult definition to nail down. And so we tried to give some options, but I kind of just wanted to give you all some context is that we're looking at the simplicity of the definition and whether or not it makes sense, but also that it will hold up throughout the life of this grant and the purpose of it. So this is the first definition that we put forward. It's a non-metro county according to the most recent analysis of the USD Economic Research Service. So that is the source that we used. They released a study on rural areas within, across the nation within every state in 2023. And this includes a combination of open countryside, places with fewer than 5,000 people and 2,000 housing units, and urban areas with populations ranging up to 50,000 people that are not part of a larger labor market. So I'm going to pause here and just ask for any sort of feedback or thoughts or comments on this particular definition. Grant.
Yeah, thank you. So I noticed when I was looking through this that this is the only definition that includes a county, and rather than just defining as an area. And since these applications, I believe, are coming in from the correctional facility, not through like, a LIPSIC, which would be more county organized, I feel like we may want to avoid a rural definition of that includes county. And I'm thinking of like Lane County, right? Lane County includes Florence, Oregon, which is, I would not consider a metropolitan area, but the county itself may qualify based on this definition because of Eugene. And so I guess that was my only thought on this, is that we may want to stay away from something that classifies it as a county.
Okay. Okay. And so are you suggesting then that the definition needs to be more specific to the facility, the access to the facility itself, or like?
Well, I mean, I think option B is a geographic area outside of a metropolitan city. And so I think if we're receiving a application from the jail in Florence, right, it's going to be treated as a rural area. If we use a definition like B or C. I think if we did A, it may not, because of its inclusion in the county where Eugene sits.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's perfect. Captain Evie? I think you're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
A couple questions based on these options, option A, B, and C. Are they based on any historical that you guys have used in other grant, or because I know both OAR and ORS have, in certain cases, rural definitions, and I just was trying to figure out where
Yeah,
we're talking.
So option B and C, OHA has used similar definitions. And the reason why we didn't use ones that were similar to other CJC grants, and the reason why we kind of utilized the OHA ones was because OHA used them according to hospitals. And so we thought that the definition would be a little bit more clear in this type of grant, because we are looking at a physical space of facilities and trying to match it to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's kind of the reasoning behind it. But something like our marijuana grant, the definition on that wasn't super applicable, just because it didn't allow kind of that reference back to a correctional facility. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think that would be more of my logical side of my brain saying, okay, then option B and C, which are tied to historical or other, would be something we probably want more focus on, so that way we're not just creating something out of nowhere.
Okay. Let's see, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks. I was able to find just another source on the internet listing kind of the counties in Oregon and who meets the definition, and it looks like we would have 25 counties meeting the rural definition by option A. I don't know if that's an analysis CJC has also done or kind of checked on, but it seems to me like the intention in the bill was more to protect like a minority of rural counties to make sure that they get adequate funds to implement. And if we have 25 rural counties, I don't think that's what was intended with having a set aside. Basically, like we're wanting to have a set aside for a smaller group of counties, so we should pick a more restricted definition of rural.
So I will say to that, thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. I will say to that, 10% of the funding does have to go to rural counties. And so we can, CJC step, there's a couple of options that we can talk about when we get to kind of the review criteria and how you all would recommend prioritizing that. But I will say, and just in response to that, most counties in Oregon are rural. You will see that. And so the number of counties that comes from that definition is not terribly surprising, and who qualify. This is why it's why we presented you with 3 different options, but it's also why there is some difficulty in getting this definition in a way that makes sense. So thank you for that feedback. I do have a map. I just kind of wanted to go through these one by one just to see if we could get some feedback on the 3 of these to see what you all thought about them. And then if it would be helpful, I can show the map. I can kind of go back and forth. It's whatever you all would think would be most helpful. Captain Eby, I think you were first on that. Go ahead.
So 2 things. One, I think the map would be so we can kind of get our heads wrapped around it. Also, I think we need to understand the intent of the bill and the language was not to ensure that dense populations didn't get all the money. And correct. So, when we're talking about, yes, we have a ton of rural, a few frontier counties in Oregon. And so the idea really was just so it doesn't get all the money's all located in a couple of our biggest cities. And so that's really just so we keep that in mind as we're moving forward.
Yes, thank you. So you all should be able to see this map. If you can't, let me know, but okay. Let's see. Josh Aldrich.
Just echoing Captain Eby's thoughts. He just beat me to it because he clicked the button faster.
Okay.
In the work group with the legislative concept, there was a lot of discussion about those counties that are situated geographically away from the primary resource hub. And so, I in looking through the options, I think the option C, where it was actually like a geographical distance, kind of meant more what we were trying to talk about, which was, those counties that are just not able to get that big resource hub. And that even goes, I know, who was it? Sorry, I can't remember. Was it Grant that was talking about some of the city jails? And while the intention I understand the intention of separating those out. Most of them are actually located near those resources that would be easily accessible.
Are you referring to, sorry, are you referring to Grant's comment on like Florence not being able to access what is in Eugene, like with Lane County? Is that what you're talking about? Like just so I'm clear on what you're saying, I'm sorry.
So Florence specifically is a little bit of an outlier because they are a little bit of they're geographically located. But there are other city jails that are, you know, for example, Springfield's jail is close to Eugene, so they can rely on Eugene's resources.
Okay. So to Grant's point then, and this is kind of to the group, is it less important to you all that the boundaries are counties, right? And so for option A, it sounds like nobody likes this definition, which is fine. But option A is the one that does specifically say counties. Okay. And so with Grant's point of saying that to not tie it to counties, because then there would be potentially some facilities or cities that didn't have access to resources. Is there kind of a, and the way that this map is set up is that it is divided by counties only because this is the easiest way to kind of make this a visual. Are you all saying then that it's better to not tie the definition to counties in particular, but something like option C where they are saying it is a geographic area and that geographic area is 25 miles or more or whatever? Is that what I'm hearing? Is that?
I agree with that, mainly because of the city jail component and the tribal jail components, right? So those cities clearly belong with the county, but they're eligible to apply for this grant as an individual entity.
Correct. Yes. Okay. So is there a consensus that nobody likes option A? I did see one thumbs up that nobody likes option A. Is that something? Okay, there's another one. So is this something you all want to move on from this one? Okay. So option B also allows for a geographical area. It is a little bit different than option C. We do have a source. The source is the Office of Management and Budget. And so it does give the same breakdown on a map based on that definition. And so again, Oregon is very homogeneous, you know, with populations and stuff. So the breakdown is the same. It just is worded a little bit differently in the sense that metropolitan statistical areas have at least one urban area of 50,000 or more inhabitants. And so that is where the definition of anyone outside of that would be considered rural. Is this something where when we're talking about resources or when we're talking about you know, access to things with those conversations that you all have just had, is this a better definition? Is this something that you all want to explore more? What are your thoughts? Captain Eby?
Do you have a map to go along with this so we can visually see what this would, this is it?
Yes, when we came up with these definitions, we actually were trying to see if there was a stark difference, and what we realized is Oregon is just the kind of the same around. There isn't much difference in terms of population, and so this would still be the breakdown. It would just be a different kind of definition of that geographical area that you all were referring to earlier. So what I want to make sure, if there's a difference between option B and C, that the geographical area that you all seem to agree upon is necessary, that which one is kind of makes more sense. And I think Grant had his hand up first.
So I for this map, so I don't think this would necessarily represent option B, right? Because I mean, the example I just gave, it shows all Lane County as urban. But even under option B or C, like I said, Florence, which is in Lane County on the coast, would actually be defined as rural under B or C, right? And so the map is broken down by county, but really correct. The lines of B and C would be actually more based on, you know, the I don't know if it urban growth boundaries or what it would be, basically the city boundaries, the metropolitan boundaries, right? And then
Correct.
the
Yes.
question would be whether simply being outside of that boundary is sufficient, or whether you need to be 25 miles from that boundary. Is that the primary difference?
Yes, that's a great point. So yes, so we had to have something to anchor this map to, and so we chose county lines, and so that is correct. This would, while this does encompass the same county, there would be differences, could be differences potentially within that county in terms of who is rural and who is not. But for sake of simplicity, so that you all could get a sense of where this would fall, we did anchor it to county lines, mostly so that we could also include option A. So yes, you're correct. This would look a little bit different if there was a geographical area that was specific enough. We could potentially be looking at this a little bit differently. There were a bunch of people that had their hand up. Hold on, I can't see. Annalise, did you have your hand up still? Everybody did, and then they all went down.
Yeah, so I have a question and a comment. So one
Mhm.
question is, did you consider and it sounds like we're going away from the county lines, but did you consider just looking at frontier?
I do have a map that breaks it down. It's not on my slides. I can pull it up if you all would like to see it. We didn't include that in the definition. And so we didn't include the map. But give me 1 second and I can share my other screen and pull it up if you all would like to see that. This definition included, 1 second, sorry.
There's various definitions of frontier. So I don't know if we have our own in Oregon, and then there's like the National Frontier Council, and ours is like frontier to frontier. So I don't know which one you used. I guess the reason I asked that is my comment would be, because it's such a small set aside, I would suggest that our goal needs to be defining rural as narrowly as possible to ensure that we're actually hitting the most rural areas, is the way I'm thinking about it in my head, because it's only 10%. But if others think that the other 90% is just going to go to 2 metropolitan statistical areas, maybe I would think about it differently.
So the bill just says that 10% has to go to rural. It doesn't mean that only 10% can go to rural areas and the rest can go other places. So just keep that in mind. And so we do have to ensure that that is the case, but it doesn't mean that only 10% of these available funds can go to rural counties, if that makes sense. So I know that there's hands up. Do you all want to see this map? It's got it's based on the definition of option C, I think, yeah, where we do have a metropolitan, a micropolitan, and a frontier area, and it's based on the census. So, Melanie, do you have a question that I can? You can go ahead because your hand's been up for a sec. Go ahead.
It's okay. I don't necessarily have a question. I just wanted to point out, Annalise, I like her idea, because if you do a quick search on the census website about cities in Oregon, I'm not originally from Oregon, so I had to search this, okay, that are under 50,000, there are 416 cities listed, and only 13 have more than 50,000 as a population as of 2022, right? So I agree with Annalise, because it's such a small percentage of the grant that needs to be at least allocated to this population. I think that the more strict the criteria is for that, I think the easier it will be to make sure that at least 10%, because otherwise the entire grant is going to go to any of the rural cities or counties or entities that apply. So I do actually like that idea, and I would like to see that map.
Okay, I'm gonna show it. I'm not, if I make it into like the big like, I don't know, the PowerPoint thing. You're going to see the slides on the side, which is sometimes annoying, but if I do that, then it messes this up. So I apologize. I'm just going to share this screen actually. Can you all see that? So this is just the slide. It's based on the census, and this is how it would break down based on the option C definition that we provided to you all. So this map, we didn't provide it just simply because it does get into the micropolitan conversation of what that actually looks like. If that's something that you all think is necessary, we can take that feedback. But this is another potential option on what a map would or could look like. However, if this is the case, we would need really specific feedback on what this language looks like for this definition, right? And so because of the way that this is broken down, it seems as though there's a need, or there would be a need for a little bit more detail in this specific definition in terms of what this actually means. So does that make sense? Josh, I think your hand is up. Sorry, I'm flying a little blind right now. So if you want to unmute and start talking, you can also do that if I miss you. So go ahead.
No problem. I just wanted to bring up part of the reason during the conceptual discussions that we avoided being strictly frontier is that there were representatives from some very isolated geographically locations, jails in Oregon, that have no resources. They don't really have the financial ability to implement some of these programs, and we wanted to make sure they were represented, and Frontier eliminated them from the conversation. And a lot of those, I'll be honest, do kind of fit into what on the map looks like they're the micropolitan areas. Specifically, because I'll just say it, one of the jails that was discussed is the Curry County Jail. They're so far away from everything else, but technically did not fit the Frontier definition. So I just wanted to bring that up because that's part of why we avoided it initially.
Okay, that's great context. Thank you so much for that context when looking at this. So does anybody have any comments, any further comments on this map or anything else? And I can stop sharing this and kind of get back to the presentation, or I can keep this up and we can continue with this conversation. It's kind of what you all, sounds to me like we're still going between B and C. But I've also heard that there is a need for a little bit of a more narrow definition, is what I've heard. So sorry, somebody was talking and I kept going. Did somebody?
Hello, this is Dr. Loeffler. I'm sorry I couldn't get my internet access to work. I'm with Oregon Society of Addiction Medicine. I'm the public policy chair. And I was thinking that one of the issues might not just be distance, but also factors like weather and road maintenance. So there might be places that aren't very far apart from a larger town, but the roads might not be passable at certain times of year. So there's like other factors besides distance that can create geographic isolation.
Okay, thank you for that context as well. And I think that could also get back to and be tied back to the discussion about resources, right? And so in terms of what we're thinking geographically, population-wise, and then also resources and access to resources are all things that can be considered in this definition. So the other thing in between these two options, it sounds like we're kind of going back and forth between them. If there is feedback on a different approach, that is something that we could also, we would also like to hear. I will need some specificity in terms of what you all think that approach should be potentially. But we relied on a lot of national level definitions. We relied on some OARs that already existed in Oregon to kind of go through this. And so if you feel as though we missed a source or somewhere to look, please, that is also some feedback that would be helpful for us as well. Daniel.
Thanks. I'm not seeing that any of these definitions are restrictive of rural to the point where 10% of the funds or like 10% could reasonably go to only those rural counties. Like I think there's probably enough rural counties or rural jails under any of the definitions that they're going to need more than 10% of the funds. So it does make me think about if we want to show priority to jails we think have more trouble accessing resources because they're rural, then it would be something to factor in the grant process later. And I think we're going to be talking about formula versus competitive grant applications, but we could take it into account in that way. It's seeming to me like we're going to have a need for more than 10% of the funds to go to rural areas. So probably the rural set aside is not going to affect that distribution as much as it could have, I guess. I certainly wasn't aware of kind of the number of counties that would probably qualify as rural when I was thinking about that set aside.
Yeah, it is. It just because of the nature of where Oregon's population sits, like where the most of the population is, it does kind of mean that most of them will fall in the definition of rural. So it is something for sure. Daniel, I'm glad you brought that up, and we are not going to get to it today, but we may get to it next week with the conversation about the formula versus competitive and how potentially there is the ability to prioritize rural within a formula. And so we can have that discussion. Thank you for bringing that up, because we will kind of tie that back in when we do have that discussion as well. So absolutely. Somebody else had their hand up. Annalise? Oh, sorry.
I think Captain Eby was first.
Okay, go ahead. Captain Eby, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, Dr. Hoover pretty much brought what forward I was thinking, which is when you look at it, if we're looking at formula, obviously that's a discussion later, which is what I was going to bring up, is that that 10%, depending upon how we do it, we're going to hit those areas.
Okay.
If we're doing a formula. If we're doing competitive, then we have more of a bigger discussion about that. But I think if we're just looking at completely looking at formula, I know it's later on, we're going to hit those individual counties that are considered rural or frontier in some form. So it's just something to think about.
Are you is that regardless of option B or C?
Yeah,
so if we go with either definition, we would still, in a formula, we would still hit those areas?
Yes, if you go with either B or C, we're going to hit those. And so what really my thing is, we could, because a lot of places, I mean, they talk about this, what's urban, what's rural. We could probably spend weeks trying to figure this out and splitting hairs all over the place. When reality is I think B and C will cover. The question is the formula by which we're going to use later, whether or not we put a set aside and then determine based on like intake numbers. They're still going to get, we're going to get that coverage for those areas.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Annalise?
As always, Lee and I are on the same wavelength. So I agree completely. I think it just depends. If we decide to do a competitive, one suggestion I would make is to perhaps use a population density measure for the area that the jail serves. And we could look at, right, like what are the population density for, all the jails, and maybe choose the bottom quartile or something, maybe as an alternative to some of these. But I think it depends. It's not as important if you're going to do formula.
Okay, perfect. I think there are multiple people. Ryan, do you have your hand up?
So yeah, so being from one of the small counties on the eastern side, I think B and C, like Evie said, they're we're just splitting hairs, but we're going to get represented either way. But then we got to look at some of the other counties. So you've got Wallowa, who contracts with Union County. So I mean, you've got one county that doesn't actually house anybody, but they have to drive, and I believe it's well over 25 miles. And then we bring in the weather aspect of getting them to Union County. But I mean, you've got Union County pulling the weight of Wallowa County. So even their county shows one number, they actually represent, honestly, both counties. So I think option B or C, either one is going to represent the smaller counties.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. That context as well. Captain Evie, did you have your, yes, you do have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to kind of follow up on that. I know I don't want to jump ahead, but when we talked about formulas and specifically population, what I think would potentially capture this, especially what was just brought up about the smaller that have to drive or do, is looking at population versus jail intake numbers. Okay, not just the population they serve, but obviously the percentage of those individuals in that service area. So, for instance, some of those smaller jails who, obviously, somebody like Multnomah County or somebody's going to take, intake most, but you have to compare that to their population. And therefore, I think you would see with a formula, some of those smaller or rural jails potentially get a little bit more of that money because their percentage is higher based on that smaller general population. Something to think about. In that way, we might be able to capture that. Okay,
perfect. Grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just kind of responding to the comment. I do think the jail intake numbers are going to be, pretty crucial to determining where funds are going. I mean, obviously, I'm in Multnomah County. I'm well aware of that. But when we're looking at administering an MAT program, a lot of the cost comes down to observation of administration, to administering. And so the intake population of those jails and corresponding to, the level of, generally fentanyl, but other controlled substances in the area, I think should be kind of the primary focus, because I think the goal of this is to, make MAT programs that help, reduce, overdoses in custody, help folks kind of get on track for treatment as they're being released. And so I want to make sure that we're sort of focused on the jails themselves and not the counties. And this sort of goes to that Union-Walla comment. I mean, there's one jail there that would be applying. It wouldn't be both counties. And so, I think that as we're having this conversation, we want to remember that the applicant is the jail itself.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left. I do have to leave a little bit of room for public comment just in case. So I want to do a couple of things. This has been a fantastic discussion, feedback for us. Couple of things. Does anybody have any sort of preference between option B or C? Is there one of those that is better? Is it something that you want CJC staff to evaluate the language based on your all's feedback? Is there something that you all need to see maybe next time? I know Grant brought up the point that this map is it's anchored in counties. Is there something else that you all need to see to come to that conclusion? It sounds like everybody is comfortable with the idea of option B or C. If that is the feedback, if it's just one or the other, that's fine. If you all feel more strongly about one or the other, then that's something also that we can get feedback on. I kind of just want to see if there is a preference in terms of language between this one and this one, in terms of what you all think would be more effective, to Grant's point of it being anchored in a facility, to the access to resources. We are going to be talking about a formula potentially going forward. And so all of those things, also the longevity of the grant, is there one of them that you prefer over the other, or is there something else that you would like to see? And I'll stop talking.
I think it would be valuable for the group to see a map with the jails indicated, including municipal and tribal jails that exist. And I understand, Rachel, you probably need some help with some of that. And I'm sure that between the jail commanders on here, we could get you lined out.
Okay. It would, if this is really fat, is this something that we could do by next Wednesday?
Yeah, I think so. I would just need help, and Lee, maybe you have the answers. I'm not sure exactly who has a municipal jail right now. I looked at, I know some of them, but
I can get that. I have that information. That's relatively easy.
Okay. if you could send that to myself or Ryan or whoever at CJC, that would be fantastic, and we'll see what we can do to put that together. Moxie?
Yes, thanks. One of the things that I usually think about with rules and policies is who could we inadvertently be excluding with any of these definitions. So I wonder if there's some way to word it. I like the general meaning, like the concept behind option C. I just wonder if there's some spectrum we could create so that it's not like a discrete cutoff of 25 miles, but rather a spectrum of distance, so that preference would be given for rural funding based on number of miles or geographic obstacles. If that makes sense to people, like what if a jail is 22 miles away instead of 25, and the roads are not that passable in winter, things like that cut them off. I just wonder if some kind of like a graded distance wording would be better, so that they get preference if they're further, but they don't get cut off from the rural definition at 24 miles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to try not to overpromise. Okay, so, but would it be helpful if you all, the map that you requested as it related to jails, would it be helpful if we tied this definition to that, if that makes sense? And so we could see, because the spectrum, what kind of happened with these three definitions is they all fell in the same areas, even though we tried to come up with some differences in language. And so what we could see then is if that map, it may not make a difference if there is a spectrum or not. They may fall within the same area. We just simply don't know. So if that is something that you want us to potentially look at, we can attempt as best we can to do that. Would that be helpful in looking at kind of where they would fall based on this definition, tying it back to the specific jail?
I
is that
think
what's
yeah, currently it sounds like it wouldn't change who is eligible. I just think in terms of what I think you were mentioning about making the wording something that's durable in the future, it might make sense just so that if, for instance, if the jail grows and they need to acquire a new building, but it's 26 or 23 miles or 22, we don't want to kind of create strictness around where they can move without losing their program and things like that.
okay? That's a great point. Okay. Okay. Any other feedback on? So it sounds like you all are good with option B. It sounds like option C is kind of the preference in terms of looking at a map that we can hopefully put together by next week to present to you all, so that you all can see what option C would look like. Is that okay if we just go with option C? Are you all comfortable with just looking at a map with option C, or would it be helpful to see the difference between B and C based on the feedback you've given us? Daniel, you put a thumbs up, but which one for which one?
I'm still feeling like we will be thinking more about prioritizing rural counties in how to do formula versus competitive, and that I don't have a strong opinion B versus C.
Okay. Okay. So if you all are good, then we'll just stick with option C. Seems like this is kind of the one that has been centered around the most discussion. We'll provide a map in the beginning just so you all can see what it looks like, and we'll go from there without changing any of this language or anything like that, potentially looking at that spectrum that was mentioned, kind of that little bit of wiggle room for growth across the grant. Okay, perfect. Okay, we have 10 minutes. I am going to skip around a little bit on your draft. I do know that we are, obviously we've talked about the competitive versus formula. We are going to discuss that next time. We do want to get into some detail, but I do want to just quickly go over a section that's not highlighted in the draft rules, but it's under the section of application requirements, and there's a lot of text on this slide, and I apologize. But I just want to get to the part where it says grant applications must, under the grant application requirements. This is what's written. I just want to get feedback quickly on anything that may or may not make sense in this list. If this is, most of this stuff comes from the bill itself. Josh, I think that's your hand. Go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. You totally can.
This is actually a point that I looked at when you sent out the draft. The demonstrate coordination with a local MAT provider piece. Some of the jails may be looking to do that through this grant, and I worry that the way I read that is that they should already have that relationship established. And I can tell you, we're going through it right now. It's a difficult and expensive process just to get established, and so I worry about that being an exclusion.
Okay. If we changed, because we do, that is a section in there specifically talking about collaboration. If we change the language from demonstrate to maybe demonstrate how you will, or demonstrate something like that, so it doesn't, but still keep that coordination piece in, just kind of change the language for maybe ones that don't have it. Is that what you're saying would be helpful?
That is what I was thinking, but I see Melanie shaking her head, and she's got as much experience about this as anybody, so she's going to change my mind in a minute.
Okay. Go ahead, Melanie. I don't know who's, go ahead.
Dan may be thinking the exact same thing that I'm thinking. So some of us have our own relationships within our facilities through our health vendors. So I do not think that it should be a must that they demonstrate coordination with a local medication assisted treatment provider. I think that instead of a must, it needs to be in a different section so that if I apply for a grant, maybe I need a couple of things to go with my program, but my treatment provider is my treatment provider. I don't have a relationship with another treatment provider because we provide our own. So that would exclude me from that grant. And there are a couple of counties who do have the same situation that I do. So I don't necessarily think that should be the grant must have this.
Okay. Daniel.
Yeah, I was going to also comment on the same point. First of all, I think we should strike the word local because some of the MAT providers are not local, and that can be deliberate if you're going with a telemedicine approach to serve a jail. I mean, local is great, but may not be feasible. And then we might want to just change it to MOUD provider because that's the language being used. The other point I wanted to make, this is kind of like what Melanie is saying, is how do we define that provider? I was thinking more like if we did competitive, I was already trying to think about what we would say we want to prioritize. And to me, it's like prioritizing a provider who has experience doing MOUD and that we think could do it well. And we need to think more about the wording of that. But I do want that to be able to be inclusive of health vendors that are doing this on like a national scale and have some experience, as well as the telehealth and local very specialty addiction medicine clinics. So those are some considerations around B.
Perfect. Thank you. Orion?
I don't know that it adds a lot because I think it was already mentioned by Melanie, but yeah, I think with that one, it's more about them describing what their existing coordination is or what they're trying to build. The way that it's worded as demonstrating coordination, is describing that they already have some existing program or existing relationship, and agree with Dan too. I mean, I don't think that we have a lot that are using telemedicine, but with a local medication or MOUD provider might exclude some of those.
Okay. Thank you. Grant.
Yeah, I would agree with the comment. I mean, I do think that we want to make sure that there is a must for the coordination with MOUD provider, but I think maybe adding the caveat, internal or external or planned coordination or plans to coordinate, some modifiers in there. But I will say, so under sub E, because it's, describe how the grant funds will be used for one of the following. E appears to be the catch-all. And I'm concerned that the catch-all just may be too vague, especially that only one of these is required for any application. So I think I would want to see sub C, sub E tightened up.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that is not, I will look later. That I know some of these off the top of my head. I don't know which ones are in the bill directly, but I will double check just to make sure that that one is not, and see if we can change that language. So thank you for tagging that, Grant. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's see. Orion, did you raise your hand again, or is it still up?
I did, just
There you go.
a
Okay.
comment on that, but
Yeah.
I think Josh had his up. I think E, when thinking back to the conception of this, was really targeted at thinking about some of the staffing concerns. So if that could be considered as that language has changed, that in a lot of the smaller and different facilities, that the staffing was really a limiting factor and challenge.
Okay. Yeah, and that, just to follow up, that is in the bill. So,
Yeah,
so
that was the reason my hand was up too, Orion. I mean, for some of the counties, we're talking they have a dozen adults in custody, and any small step would be a huge improvement over what they offer now. And so I think we wanted to support even those smallest moves.
I'm just going to jump in here because I want to agree with Josh, because I think the intent originally of the entire process was to provide financial assistance for jails who have small programs or don't have programs at all across the state. So I completely agree that E makes that what we needed it to make.
okay. Thank you. Moxie?
Yes, just a minor detail on C in the center of the page, administer screenings for opioid use disorder or risk of an acute withdrawal. You might just add between acute and withdrawal, just add opioid. I doubt anyone will be confused about it, but alcohol withdrawal is much harder to manage, and it's not really in the scope of the grant. You could leave it out either way.
Perfect. Nope, thank you for that. Okay, I know this was quite fast. Does anybody have any other issues with this? We do have a minute left. I do have to give public comment. We can come back to this next time, but appreciate this feedback on this language. And then, so next time we will do the map in the beginning. If we need to, we can come back to this if there's any sort of updates, and then we will get into kind of the review criteria, which we were talking about earlier. So there is a highlighted part in those rules. We may be sending out an updated draft if we have to make any changes based on your feedback. And so we will let you know which draft to be looking at as we do meet next week. So really quickly, this is the time, this is a public meeting, and so there is time for public comment. So if there's any member of the public that's in this meeting that would like to speak, you can go ahead and do that. Please just raise your hand and keep any comments to 1 to 2 minutes. And just a friendly reminder, we're not allowed to answer any questions. Okay, I don't see any. All right. So next steps, we'll take your feedback. Like I said, if we need to make any adjustments, we will be sending you out an updated draft. We will do our best to provide that map so you all get an idea of what option C looks like. Thank you so much for your feedback. This was a fantastic discussion, and see you next Wednesday. Have a great day.